Say hi to everybody. There we go. So welcome everybody to our second speaker series of this semester. So we have a great host, or sorry, a great speaker today, Diane Hickey. And he's going to talk about some various ways to look at funding for games, including some very interesting areas and grants and Unity and all these different people. So we want to welcome Diane here. And if you have questions as we go along, you can put them in chat and I can interrupt and or bring them up as needed, or we can make sure they get handled at the end, which we'll have time for Q&A at the end. With that, I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to mute myself for the most part and just let you go. And welcome. Thank you very much for being here, Diane. It's all your show.
My pleasure. Thanks, James. Hello, everybody. What we're going to talk about, and I start with who is going to buy your game, is I'm a little bit of a commercialization expert on how to get things to market, from the idea stage to the actual people are actually buying it. So one of my most recent positions was at the National Science Foundation, where I got to fund quite a few games. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and give you some ideas for other things as well. I have spoken at Games for Change Festival, which is up in New York City in the summer, and it's really great. And I was talking to Ed Metz, who runs the Small Business Innovation Research Program over the Department of Education, and he said that 50 of the companies he's funded, he saw at Games for Change Festival, and they've done some really cool things. Serious Play Conference takes place in Florida, also in the summer at the right next to the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy, which also is another graduate program for game developers. And that also has a lot of really cool games that have come out of that. And in fact, I just saw Birds of a Feather, which is a card game, so came out in Barnes and Noble yesterday, but I got to play it at Serious Play. So that was a lot of fun. And let's see. All right, so I'm going to talk about America's Seed Fund, the SBIR, and SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research Grant. And here are some big companies that you might have heard from that had gotten SBIR awards before. SBIR Gov can be throwing these in at the end. Apologies for the clip art and horribleness of this video, of this slide, but this is normally how I go through very slowly to explain a small business innovation grant. We've all heard, the news story. Scientists have discovered, that could lead to VR that's going to be able to link us all into blah, blah, blah. So you guys have heard of this, right? And so in my other slide, I'm trying to cover it up over here. Then I'll show, okay, the government hears this and is like, how come that hasn't happened yet? We're funding that research. So this little professor down here in the edge, and he had the idea, and we paid for his students and they did the publications. How come the big company over here isn't buying it? And normally this example would be a little chemist does this, ExxonMobil can only buy in a 55-gallon drum, and who is going to do the development to get it from here to here? In an analogy for a game, you could do a little prototype part, but there's a lot that has to work for it to interface with all these different gaming systems or all the different, if you're doing it for whatever, there's a lot of work between here and there, but there wasn't any funding for this. So that's where the SBIR program came out. The big overview, and this is from my NSF days, is that we award, up to $2 million for your small company. Now, the trick here is it's like $275,000 for your phase one, which is feasibility. It's less than a year. We normally call this a prototype stage. So you have something, but you really need to prototype it out and prove it. And I've got an example at the end that'll kind of crystallize how this might happen. The next one, if you get through that, and granted there's the phase one, only about 10% of the applicants actually get to phase one. Then about 50% of phase one moves to phase two, and that's research towards, it says prototype, but it really means towards commercialization, towards where someone will be giving you money in order to bring it to market. And that could be a funding source like venture capital, or let's just say Epic Games really wants to bring it out, so they buy it from the small indie company to whatever. I'm not really sure how that works. You got to talk to everybody else about that. But these are going to be for research things that go forward. So this should be based on some fundamental, groundbreaking research that we just found, and it goes out. So here are a couple of success stories that you can find on the SBIR site. One about Shell Games a long time ago, and Filament Games. There's a lot more, and I'm going to showcase a couple of these. A lot of different agencies give them, and if you're doing something for health, there's National Institute of Health, National Institute of Aging is funding games, National Science Foundation, and then Department of Education is probably a big one. There are some other unusual places too that I'm going to highlight. For America, for NSF, the ones that I had funded, some of them were Dissect 360, which was a kind of 3D video, as you can imagine, dissecting. But using the innovation there was actually how to take the images from a real heart. Because in the books, they're different colors. In the real world, they're all like colors of gray, I guess. I'm not really sure. And then here are some others that you might recognize, Immerse Games. There's a bunch of others in here. Here are some XR funded, not maybe so much games, but data, bad VR, parallel reality. Neurotrainer was originally going to be a educational system, but they found that because it helped make reflexes quicker, and again, from a neuroscientist who developed this, they found out like the NCAA, that pro teams wanted to do this, and this way they can actually know why it is that their reflexes aren't getting faster, or if their eyes aren't going to the right place, all sorts of neat things. That's where they got who paid for it. And they can still always go back into education. A big one, neat thing, and especially since you're in the DC-ish area, is this fall, Ed Games Expo is going to be happening again. It hasn't been announced, but keep your eyes open for it. And there's a lot of videos out there about the Ed Games Expo. This is from the Department of Education about what they do. And it's a great thing to go to. It's going to, again, be at the Kennedy Center that's starting off this year. And then for that whole month, everything that they showcase out of the SBIR world is free. I can come back to any of this, so stop, whatever. Another thing is the Wilson Center. So you might not think about government and gaming, but the Wilson Center actually hosts the Federal Games Guild. And they have this whole thing about downloading the federal funding opportunities for game-based approaches. So I've put a couple of their games up here. The Fiscal Ship, it's a game, Cards Against Calamity. They did one in collaboration with the Department of State that has to do with, actually the game is to try to create misinformation, then you learn to identify misinformation. And that was shown at Games for Change a couple years ago. So let's talk about if you have an idea for your game, who is going to buy it and how that might lead to funding. Pausing. Oh, neat. Yeah, sounds awesome. Filament Games. Okay, so you need money for your game creation. Where do these investment dollars come from? And this can be audience participation. Normally, if you want to throw in the meeting chat, if you're a shout out, or James, tell me, where do you normally think that if you wanted somebody to give you money to make a game, where would that come from?
Well, I mean, there's always the three F's, like the friends, family, and what's the other F?
Fools.
Fools. Okay, there you go.
Friends, family, and fools. Those that's normally where a lot of the first money comes from. Anybody else want to throw it in chat? Or we hear a lot in the small business world and incubators, since you're also in an incubator, about venture capital, private equity, angel investors. So angels are high net worth individuals who hear what you're talking about and you're like, whoa, that's awesome. Let me give you X amount of money. And then there are angel groups and things like that. But really most small businesses don't get funding from from those sources. So again, when you're starting out, the friends, families, and fools whatever, because probably they're not going to get that money back. It's really hard. But there are some other places, and I want to talk about. Foundations and government grants. I've already kind of covered a little of those. If you're doing something for healthcare or children or the elderly, there might be patient advocacy groups employing lobbyists to go off and do something that might be there. And then also there are organizations and companies that address the problem. I'm about to show you a couple, but like really big companies, Exxon always has an Exxon Foundation. Thermo Fisher Scientific has an investment, and they're looking for companies that might be doing something cool and to bring it out. But they're not ready to invest their own like research money in it, but they'll give a little bit of money to see where it goes. And then of course, you guys are familiar with at least some accelerators, incubators, tech transfer offices. The Small Business Administration is a great place to start. SBA offices, they're all around if you are going to get started with an SBIR grant, because it can be a little bit overwhelming to dive down into that area. And then every university will have a tech transfer office or an economic development office. But let's talk about who's going to buy your game. Possibly a larger game thing. I don't know if you've heard of Epic Megagrants. Anybody ever heard of Epic Games? Everybody raise your hand. Woohoo! Yay! Yes, we love how Epic made their money, because it wasn't actually in games, it was their game engine, their 3D engine, right? Unreal Engine. So anybody who is developing with Unreal Engine and you're doing something really cool that maybe can help them sell Unreal Engine in the future, that's where they'll be awarding grants. And also anything that, you know, warm fuzzies and things like that too. So they've given quite a few grants. A lot of the SBIR companies that I funded actually also had iTherapy, which was a virtual kind of therapy for children who had difficulty speaking or speaking clearly or whatever. So they'd go yes, no, and all this. It was really cool. So they've gotten that, all of these things. So this is a neat place to go. Also, of course, Unity, then I have to be equal opportunity, right? If you're developing in Unity, they also have Unity for Humanity, and you'll see these at the Games for Change Festival as well. And they offer mentorship, technical support for social impact projects. So these are a few examples of where you can get grants from a not government source. But if you think about your game and you're looking to get money from investors, whether it is a foundation or whatever, they're going to ask, you know, kind of what problem are you solving? Who is your customer? These types of things. Thanks for the link. Another way to look at it is who cares about the problem you're solving? So there is a very large kind of gaming or simulation, especially in the XR range, for the elderly. So AARP, these types of places, they will either have an incubator or an accelerator or something for small companies or people with ideas to make their population better. Same with obviously children and learning, but even environmental causes. If a lot of games about just raising awareness of what it means to, what if I drop part of my thing on the ground, where does it go from there? And then you can have like this game of, you know, so that might be EPA, that might be the Friends of Cute Deer in the world, I don't know, you know, but those are the things to kind of look for. Most of those organizations also have foundations, or at least give some kind of money to make their thing that they're interested in higher up. And games, everyone should by now know how engaging and useful games are. If they don't, they're really kind of living under a rock. That's just me. The other question about who cares about the problem, and common answers in this, I talked to a lot of ed tech, okay, people in the ed tech industry, and they're like, you know, who wants kids to be smarter? Nobody. I mean, who wants them to know math better? Everyone. Oh, the government wants it. Or who's going to buy it? Oh, the Department of Energy or students. Well, whoever's using it might not be your customer. Oh, it's for teachers. Again, they might not be your customer. But who is responsible for solving that problem and what matters to them? And that's kind of the way to back out where you can find some money. Let me give you a very successful example. 3 weeks ago, this just would have been an example. Now it's a very successful example. This is Prisms of Reality. Anna Rupa, who started Prisms of Reality, came to us 2.5, 3 years ago with an idea. She had, I guess, put on VR. She was in the New York public school system. And she's like, oh, this is amazing. But she was really worried that people would make it junk. There's a lot of ed tech junk out there. And so, for example, if I'm and this is my example for how to sell things, if I'm a big textbook editor and I'm trying to sell something to the state of Florida, and I go to the state of Florida, I'm like, hey, remember how you bought all these textbooks from us last year? You're gonna buy them again? They're like, oh no, we have to get it interactive. And the state of Florida and the textbook guy says, oh, we are interactive. Look, our textbook is online, and if you press this button, it turns the page. Yay, interactive! But not really taking advantage of the technology. So she was kind of worried that that would happen with VR. And I think we could see how that would happen. She wanted to put it in the architecture on the back end to really take advantage of what we know in a pedagogy, how we learn way. And then so that you can use every aspect of learning in the VR, XR world. So that's what she applied to us for. But in that phase 1, so we're like, yeah, this is really hard technology on the back end. So it met our challenge of technology part. But we're like, okay, now we want you to go talk to customers. So she did. She went to the districts in New York. And her first approach was, hey, we're creating a back end to support these best practices in VR. We're going to start with high school physics. And her customers, the districts or the states, were like, yay! You're going to help our seniors and AT students and honors juniors and seniors get better grades in their AT and honors physics classes. Ooh, that's lovely. Yay. Too bad I can't do anything about Algebra 1. And she's like, well, I can do something about Algebra 1. Why is Algebra 1 a big deal? So they created this backend support to do Algebra 1. And districts without a product, without a prototype, started getting checks, started getting investments from Meta to create it, to get it out there. Whole states were actually giving before she had a product. But the difference here, and that's and one of the things she did in her phase 1 was she got out her Pandemic by Prisms prototype out on the Oculus App Store, so you could go in and you could see this thing. It's out there now. You can go do it too. It's not, earth-shattering as far as VR or anything goes, but it was enough to show the potential. And what they needed was a way to kind of get students motivated about Algebra 1. Now, the question that I asked the audience again, why the difference between Algebra 1 and physics, high school? And often when I was at Games for Change last year, like, oh, well, Algebra 1 is your foundation for the rest of whatever. Like, yeah, that's true. But what else? Who had this problem? Who's this poor guy right here? The districts. And the districts always want to help their students. They really do. Where do they get their money from? Anybody know where districts get their money from? People said government, people said whatever. Well, I live in Alexandria, and we went house hunting. It's really expensive here. But if I go into the same house in, I don't know, I grew up in Alabama, so I'm going to say this. In rural Alabama, I can get a much bigger house for the same amount of money. But one of the big things is where I am in the school districts. The school districts get a rating from Great Schools, which is another company that does things in Great Schools. Where do Great Schools get their ratings from? Algebra 1 tests that are given, this baseline test given to freshmen across the nation, whether you're into testing or not, it is the way that things are. And if you can just get the students to understand why this is important and just a little bit, they don't even have to learn from it so much as to get it excited, understand why it makes sense for them to study algebra, their numbers will go up. Something about motivation, like why you're in school, why you're paying all this money, motivates you to do better. So it was along those lines. And that is why Prisms of Reality has now just finished a $12.5 million fundraising from one of the top Silicon Valley VC firms, which is really unheard of. It's quite unusual, but it's really great. Now, one of the last things I'm going to do, I've reached out to this. You probably get this all the time. How do I get involved in the games industry? And so I actually, you can go to Chandra Hancock on LinkedIn, and she just posted, it's really recent, just posted a great video about how do I get a job in the games industry. So I'm just sharing it with you guys because it might be useful. I thought that our feedback was really good, and that was really a great, something I just thought I'd share with you in case I didn't share anything else of value during this talk. So this is me. I do like working with for-profit companies because if you have something of value, people will exchange something of value like money for it. And it's a quick way to know if what you have is something people are going to want. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm happy to pull it back up at any other point too. But yeah, that was about 20-ish minutes.
That was good. It was excellent.
So, yeah, and I'm happy to elaborate. I can talk all day. I love the sound of my own voice, all that jazz. So anything you guys want to ask?
Sure. We had one question earlier, which I wrote down so we don't have to scroll up, but it was, what is actually getting funded mean for a game? Are you getting funding for the tools that make the game, the time to make the game, the people making the game, you know, like their salaries so they can live? Like, what exactly is getting paid for, or how is the money getting used typically in these kind of funding situations, whether it's through a grant or, you know, Kickstarter, whatever the case may be? Yeah,
that is a great question. It depends where you get your money from. Like Kickstarter, if you do a social funding, you can use it for, I don't think there's any restriction. And you tell people what it is. So you can use it for any restrictions. But normally you're saying, we're trying to raise this amount because the ones I've seen for Kickstarter, like the tabletop games, you know, you can make it out of paper, but this is so that we can pay to get it produced. But we need this much money to make the run. For something like the government, a small business innovation research grant technically should be taking that research to the next level. So a lot of it is going to be people's salaries. We do expect, especially for almost any technology now, AWS you'll be paying something for cloud services. And then AWS also for educational games will give you in-kind grants as well. We expect if you're running a company for a small business that there's overhead. So we allow 50% indirect of people's salaries for overhead, which would be normally healthcare, things like that. And then the government decides that your profit as a small business for getting their grant is 7%. Or 10%, depending on which grant, and that can be used for however you want. Probably used to pay the grant writers or the people that helped you get there or whatever, because it is a very confusing process. Although you don't need that. It's meant to be that a small business can do it, but it is a long time between submission, and I say long time, 6 months type thing. So if you're not already working, and it's really hard to support yourself. What it's meant a little bit more for is for businesses that are kind of already doing some kind of business, like you're making some money. Let's just say that you've created a game online from your graduate student class, and then you put it out on Google Play or whatever, and you're charging 20 cents for it. And so you're making, I mean, whatever it is, the dollar or whatever. And you actually have people who are playing it and then want you to do more. And then you realize you read Dr. Casey's paper online that says, hey, if you do this, and I was just, Endeavor RX There's a video game. You guys heard this, right? Endeavor RX. A video game that has to be prescribed, or doesn't have it. Yeah, I think so. Has to be prescribed for ADHD children to help them out. So if you're like, well, if I just did this much more research, then I can create this kind of game, and then that would be an explanation for an SBIR. Now, for Epic Megagrants or Unity, normally that you would take that money and part of your salary, from the size of grants that I've seen, like 50,000, 100,000, you're not probably going to be paying full time for somebody, but you probably also don't need to pay for somebody all year 100%. A lot of time, and especially if you need somebody who can program Unity or in any of these things, you probably don't need them for that long, but some hours is still a good chunk of change, $10,000, $20,000 to make it worth their while and make your game usable. And then, of course, your time and things like that.
No, that's excellent.
Anything to add?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, like you said, I mean, it's going to depend on the source and kind of what you're going for. And typically when any of these kind of funding is looked at, like you said, on Kickstarter, they typically will tell you what they're using it for. Same with, grants, they have you write out a budget. It's like, here's what you're going to use it for. If there was something on there that was weird, they'd be like, wait, what? And they have really long and boring legalese about what you can and can't use it for. So so if you do go down some of these routes, you can kind of get in there. I had a question for you, and I know you just mentioned the Unity one, and I put that link in there too. And the Unity one seems a little more focused on what it wants, whereas the Megagrants seem like they cover a wide variety of different projects, from games to education and stuff like that. But even so, do you think that there's any kind of, especially like for the Epic one where there's multiple categories, do you think that if somebody were making a certain type of game, like educational or, for a purpose or something like that, do you think that would get them preferential, treatment potentially for a grant versus another regular game, right? If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. For a grant, there seems to be a perception that there's no money in the world for education, which, if you're actually solving a problem, as we showed with Prisms VR, you will get money. But again, there's a perception that games shouldn't be something we give tax-paying money to. It does seem to be a pretty good business on its own level. But yeah, if you're trying to solve a problem, and you're trying to get noticed, even if it is just a very interesting game, if you have an angle,
right?
And most games do. I literally just finished with, and it's a hard game. It Takes Two, which is a two-person game put by Epic. And my kids are telling me about this. They're like, yeah, it's about a little girl whose parents are getting divorced. And I'm like, what kind of game is this?
Right. Yeah.
And then you see these two adults, and they have to fight their way through, and you literally can't play the game by yourself. You need that other person to get in there. And I'm like, so my kids are coming home from school, I'm like, okay, we have to test this level. Like, Mom, no, I've got, Breath of the Wild I'm trying to finish up, or Pokemon Scarlet Violet or whatever. I'm like, wait, can't do it without you.
Right?
So it's really hard. But that type of game, I was looking at it, and it really did kind of address a lot of these social, emotional issues that go on in a child's brain about divorce, and then also making people kind of work together. Like, that's really hard. And I can get mad at you for no particular reason, or it's obviously not going to solve your need for therapy or anything like that. But at the end, it has this lovely story about, it's not your fault whether we do or do not get divorced, get back together or not. It has nothing to do with anything you did. It has to do with, the way it works. So that was kind of cool.
If you had jumped better on level 3, we wouldn't get a divorce.
My husband and I, when we got that, we played Portal together, and but we played as a one person. Now we've unlocked the 2-person, and we looked for other 2-player games because we had with my children had this connection. And so then we went to the 2-player portal, and it really does require it's neat. But again, back to being that more social, there's a loneliness epidemic in this country. And I have high hopes. One of the companies that I consult for is called SBIR. They are intent on making games for our most experienced citizens. And I think that generation grew up playing games. And I think there's going to be a huge market for that.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one thing we saw from the pandemic, right? Is people started to have a little more appreciation for online as well as games and the socialization aspect of these types of systems that grow out of games. So people started to realize, like, you know what, this is just a different way of doing what we all have done in the past when we didn't have digital versions of it. So that's been really good, I think, as well. What else do I have on my list here? So you talked a little bit about customer discovery, which was, I think, a key element, right? And that's kind of why I was poking at some of these grants too, is like, you may think you know what people want, but until you go out there and find out what people want and what they can actually get done. Like that algebra one is a great example, because everybody wants to make education games, but at the end of the day, the people with the money to make that game wanted something to make their scores get better, so they get their games. Yes, they want their students to do better. I mean, sure, but at the end of the day, it's money driven for them. And by focusing first on something they liked, I think that was great. Have you seen other examples of like that, like where customer discovery has really helped move the needle on somebody's product?
Everything. There is every single grant that came in as a phase 1. If it looks the same going into phase 2, it's not going to. I actually had this very large argument, and we'll get to Jess. We'll get to your question. I'm not going to let it go.
Perfect.
This one company didn't get it, and so I was talking to them like, this is fantastic. They had this 4-person team. One of them was a college professor.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, in your commercialization plan, you didn't say that you would partner with, say, these big companies, Pearson or whatever. Like, but they mentioned them as a competitor with something in an educational game. And they're like, oh, well, that's the evil empire, that's Darth Vader or whatever. And I'm like, I get that. But that evil empire has this huge sales force, and they don't have the team to develop what you did. They'd much rather just buy it from you if you would be nice to them. And they're like, no, but this is so much better. Look at our results. And so I asked their college professor, who was actually, I was like, all right, you teach, obviously you use a textbook, right? He's like, well, yeah, or a game. He's like, yeah, but I use a lot of my own stuff. I'm like, but you still have to offer something. He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, how many things did you test out before you chose that one? Or how did you test it? He's like, oh, well, I asked the professor down the way what he uses, so I just recommended that. And I'm like, how are you going to convince other people to use what you have if the way that you selected it was not to go, oh, what's the efficacy and what's the whatever? And how have your studies showed all of this? You didn't care. You are teaching. You just needed to have something out there, and then you do your own thing anyway.
That's why I say people are lazy. They'll do the easiest way.
Well, and if it requires an institution to change anything, and that's a big deal if you're going to the Department of Education, in their SBIR is a little bit different. It has to be immediately impactful for kind of a formal system, right? Our public education system. So it's got to be right in there. So the question is, then this literally came from my Games for Change discussion last year. One of the guys like, okay, I developed something and I'm working with the middle school teacher down the road. She loves it. Her class loves it. I went to their principal last week. I had a great discussion. He's going to think about it. And I'm like, all right, well, look at it from the principal's point of view. The principal's job is to protect their teachers and help them out. And then he said something, the principal said something about you have to be on this approved vendor list before you can buy it, which is true. And everybody's like, oh, I'm like, well, think about that principal is thinking, if his teacher gets into problems and his overworked IT person gets into problems, is there a phone number that this guy can call in the middle of the day to get in touch to fix whatever their issue is? And if you're a two-person company, that's going to be a little hard. And then at the district level, the district's like, we want to keep all of our districts rolling and as many things stable as possible so that our IT person who's sick here can go over there, because IT people are expensive. Not that everybody isn't expensive, but whatever. And then at the state level, you have this person whose entire role is to go to these conferences, play with the new stuff, see if it's actually going to work for our state, and then put it on this approved vendors list. And so then what you want to do is kind of go, who do they typically purchase from? Who's already on the approved vendors list? Oh, Kaplan or blah, blah, or Clever, whoever it is who's already on the approved vendors list. Go to their salesperson and say, hey, do you have something that Macmillan Booth doesn't have for special ed kids, for exchange, whatever? And they'll say, no, we don't. I'm like, well, we do. Can we show it to you? Will you invest in us to develop it further? Or do you want to buy it from, that type of thing. Now, granted, they might buy it from you and kill it, which is what happened to, so Codon Learning, and it's CODON, Codon Learning. And this is a really neat thing. They came up with, I'm just going to call it an app, but they should call it a system. So that if you're sitting in class in a big room of 300 people and the professor's teaching and you have a question, you can, kind of almost text it, but chat it to the teaching assistant. And if they're getting it from enough people, then they can, ask the professor to change it. And what turns out is, for me, for example, I have a PhD in engineering, but I had to take an undergraduate EE class. And in that undergraduate EE circuits class, there were 100 people. 90 of them were one color and one gender. There were 3 of us who were a different gender, and maybe 10 or so were different color-ish. And if I had a question in class, am I going to raise my hand and say something? Or nobody else is raising their hand. Well, I don't want to show that, the women can't handle it or the whatever can't handle it, or I just don't want to embarrass myself. So this actually turned out to be, when they started piloting it with their phase 1, turned out that it actually improved diversity, DEI, and they also, it's more elaborate than what I described about like texting, but it ended up, it's helping you cognitively learn to learn, because when it asks, it'll ask you some quiz questions in the middle of the day while you're walking from hither to yon. So it knows how a college student works. And when you answer, it'll say, are you sure? How sure are you on this scale? And you're like, I have no idea. So it kind of helps you build how to study as well. So, but it learned that DEI. So then the CEO, Ben, I want to say Jacobson. Ben, now his pitch is, your professors don't have to change a gosh darn thing about how they teach. But this will improve DEI for your university, your department, your whatever. So you don't actually have to train your professors who like to do the way that they've been doing it for 20 years about how to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training. This product will actually really make an impact. And that story I love, mostly because it's true, but also because he is very aware of what is on everybody's minds. We want to change, but we don't know how. I can't tell you how many times I've told my dad that I'm the engineer, but he still talks to my husband about fixing stuff, who's a chemist. So, it's harder to change people than it is kind of to work with the way that work in the system. So it's a little bit of a longer answer, but.
No, that's a great answer though. So Jess had asked a question in chat about the process of trying to get funds. Like, how do you find these ways? Like, obviously you mentioned a few of them, like specific ones, but if you're seeking out SBIR grants or other types of things, like what are the different areas where you'd go and try to find these or find something that would fit with what you're doing?
Yeah, and that's one of my biggest frustrations with this world is there's so many little things, and like I don't even have a list of all the incubators just for educational games or education or things. I'm sure I could dig with it, but I don't know where to go for this. Okay, this is my complete. And then, of course, you have to keep it updated. And are they still doing this? They change it. So I can understand why there's not one single list. Obviously, the search engines will just do well, but that's why I kind of talk about working your way backwards from who's going to be interested in your game. That's what that whole thought process is about. Because I've seen way too many presentations about, oh, you can go here. Oh, you can go here. Oh, you can go here. And I'm like, oh, my head hurts. And if you go out to the SBIR site, it does, and you listen to the SBIR 1 hour, this is how you do it. It sounds very straightforward. And I guess it could be. So, for example, the process, if you're doing National Science Foundation, and it's a little bit similar to the Department of Education. Do a lot of the people that you talk to, James, are we talking about like educate type, or are we talking more like
a little bit of both? I think there's entertainment. I mean, obviously, a lot of the kids in our program are probably more entertainment oriented than education. But obviously, being the Serious Games Institute, we're always trying to push that side of things. But I think a little bit on both. So I mean, so anything you can help on either.
Sure. And let's talk about Serious Games. And I know a lot when I was visiting, and this is the benefit of coming and seeing you, that gaming doesn't only have to be a keyboard or a this. You can actually have games. And so I think I just saw something the other day on either VR or just some kind of elderly rehabilitation game where you make it a game to do your rehab stuff. And whether that's the iPad and you're shaking it, which that doesn't require any fancy gaming, it just requires you to be able to do the accelerometer in your device.
That's why the Wii was great.
Why the Wii was great, and they talk about that. So it could be that you come up with, then you're looking for people who are trying to get more engagement from when I send you home with your homework to do this many lifts up here, this many lifts up here. If I make you hold your phone and it lifts up and all you're doing is tracking that, and it's simple, is really thing. So let me give you a quick just kind of walkthrough of if you went to the National Institute of Aging or the Department of Ed or the National Science Foundation. Let's start with this because that's a couple that you can see. First, you would either go to SBIR.gov or go to that's probably the easiest, SBIR.gov, because if you have to be a small business, all that means is you are an LLC. But then with a B.
I have to spell it right.
Sir.gov, yes, sir. So, and on the NSF site, and this is the one I know the best, it'll show you, okay, you have to get registered with the SAM system, which is a gov system. That takes 6 weeks. You have to do something like this. You have to do something like that. And you have to be an actual business, so an LLC. So none of that, well, the SAM.gov stuff takes time, but none of it's really free. So it's about probably, I don't know, $500 to $1,000 to get a business set up. It should be free. I think there are ways to get it free, but there are, every state has a different type of thing. Again, going to your small business association, local office, SBA, that can help. Again, a lot of this takes time to get going. But once you have a small business, you can then start looking through the legalese, a very long thing. And typically there's a written 15-page-ish technical approach. And because it's a business grant for these SBIRs, typically it'll be in 4 sections. Why does anybody need this? Okay. And why isn't anybody else doing it? And so an example might be loneliness epidemic is huge and people are committing suicide at blah, blah, blah rate. Things that are trying to be addressed by this, blah, blah, blah. With VR, I will create this, but it's the connectivity engine and the getting people together. That is the technically hard thing that I actually need to do more research on. So there's social science research, there's technical research, how to do that, interactive, I play Beat Saber, you play Beat Saber, but we're in different, whatever. So But to do all of that all at the same time, that's what I need this money for. Why am I the team to do it? So the next part will be the team. I've got, you know, this type of thing. I have advisors, great advisors who already know the thing, like James and blah, blah, blah. And then you go with, okay, what are you actually going to do with this? Well, we're going to use AWS cloud services, Unity, blah, 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 to first we have to scope it out, blah, 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 blah. And then we also have to do customer discovery. And then like the last part is, oh yeah, budget. Tell us exactly how you're going to spend this money, because your neighbor is actually paying taxes to give to the government to give to you. So they're going to want to know that you're not spending it on ping pong tables or whatever. So that's typically what I'll go through. Then every agency is different on how they evaluate. NSF brings in outside experts. Department of Ed has internal people review it. And they, Department of Ed only does it once a year. And then they score it, and whoever's above the score gets it, whoever's below the score doesn't, but you get feedback for it, so you can try again next year. But it's normally like a 6-month project process between the time you apply, 4 months, 6 months till you hear if you're in what we call due diligence. Are you really a company? Do you really know what you're doing? Did you make all this up? That type of stuff. And then until the money gets in your bank account. So while you hear a lot about startups getting it, it really would be great if you already were making some revenue or had a full-time job, and you really do need this to bring it. Originally, it was, like I said, in that horrible clip art illustration, for all the money we were putting into universities and research to make sure some of that actually got out to the public to be used.
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, like you said, I mean, what they want to know from it is that, well, you have a great idea, but you can actually make it, right? It's one thing to have a great idea, but if you don't know anything, or if you don't have a plan to actually make it, they're not going to give you that taxpayer money. So a lot of what makes, those, the applications good is addressing those things well. And that, like you said, can take a little bit of time. And we have people both, obviously at the VSGI and at the university, and there's folks like at the different business helpers out there, and even the counties and whatever, they can help you with that as well, which is great. So you're not on your own for these types of things, but it may feel like it, but you're not.
No, you're not. There are a lot of places to go to help, but again, where do you start is always so Well, you did mention that a lot of your students are interested in entertain, in games, real games, right? And it's a big industry, and it employs people. And when we talk about broader impact for our nation, employing people is really important. And gamifying simulations is actually a huge gaming industry, especially in the military, but it's now being for medical. One of the SBIR companies is creating digital twin simulations for industrial sites because it's really hard to do and nobody's solving that problem. But if you are trying to train somebody to work on an oil rig to make sure that they do something properly, and how do you simulate if you see these things going off? Well, you don't want to simulate. First of all, you don't want to reconstruct the whole control room and then practice, okay, these alarms are going off because not on the, then other people here go, oh my God, are we really about to have another oil spill? But if you put somebody in VR, you can actually train that so they've seen it before, but actually doing that simulation is technically difficult. Exxon's spending a lot of money on it, but they're talking to this SBIR company because they have a different way of going about it. They have a different thought. They have a different way. So that's really cool. But in the same way for entertainment, if I like using Epic grants, while again, a lot of them are for, like you said, noble purposes, there's still Epic wants to sell their engine, and Unity wants to sell their engine, and Microsoft wants to sell their whatever Microsoft doesn't own anymore. All these things. So if you can find, if your game is really motivating and you can find the number 2 person, like let's just say the number 1 person in the industry owns it. Number 2 is kind of trying to get there. So if you have something to compete with what number 1 does, or even number 3 to break into that, and you're creating a game, going to one of those lower tiers and saying, hey, this is the game I had. It's really awesome. You're interested in this and you don't have this in your portfolio. Will you give me some money to develop it a little bit further? And then and then that's where your negotiation into whether you sell it to them, they get part of your company, they hire you, which again, isn't really a bad idea.
No, not at all.
That people, other than a small business, which you're always trying to find your next, thing and health insurance, a larger company, there's a lot of good things about why we like the larger companies to employ people and get together. And there's a lot to be said about community, which I feel is a huge way that gaming can help in the future, because I've bought into the loneliness epidemic and the need for community. And I am huge on games for just critical freaking thinking. Pardon my French, but it is hard to teach critical thinking in a classroom in a traditional manner. But don't you know that some of those Fortnite teams, sorry, I'm gonna knock over my gaming laptop and I'll be very upset. It's very heavy. That teaches critical thinking. So even if you have a game that's awesome and it doesn't focus on science or whatever, but somebody in some academic place so that you do teaching critical thinking by this kind of whatever, puzzle solving. Oh God, we were so happy with it's such a peaceful game.
Strategy, it's huge.
Strategy. And of course there's the e-games, but people are up, with the esports. But getting scholarships for it. Do you guys have an esports team?
We have like esports club, and they have teams that are going on. It's not like we have an official.
You're not getting scholarships yet.
No, not yet. We are looking into that because it is a growing field. And again, once people understand, it's just like other sports. I mean, at the end of the day, right? That's really all it is. It's and they have their own benefits. So it's well, why aren't we just embracing this new version of it? So.
Yeah. Drone racing leagues sponsored by the Air Force. Surprise, surprise. Digital twins is a fancy way of saying, dude, you're paying something original in it. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. Sometimes people haven't heard that term because it's definitely more serious game related. You hear that with some of the industry folks, but yeah, digital twin is if I got to make an engine, I'm going to break it down completely, take those schematics and make a complete virtual version of it versus just the outside of an engine that looks like an engine. No, they want something that's exact. And so that's just what a lot of people have started calling it in the industry. So
yeah. Absolutely.
I don't see any final questions, and we're almost out of time. So I think we'll call it there. But Diane, that was a great talk. A lot of great topics. I think we covered a lot of good stuff. If people have questions that are watching this later, or want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me, and then I can pass stuff along to Diane as needed, and we can get you taken care of. And really appreciate you taking the time and talking to our students and letting us record this and put it out there. It's great.
Well, good luck to you. Keep fighting the good fight, and I can't wait to play all your games in the future.
Yes. Awesome.
You play your games, but not about divorce, okay? Cool.
Yeah, right.
Thanks so much.
Care, everybody. Thanks,
Simon. Bye.
All right, you can end the recording, Ilya.